Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 206. Tonight we have an article from the Daily Mail, and this article is the account of a royal historian who is painting Joe Exotic of the Windsor family, aka Prince Andrew, in an absolutely terrible light. We all know the stories about Prince Andrew. We've heard from people that have worked in the royal palace how much of a prick he could be. We've heard that he's very rude, and we've also heard that he is very aloof and thinks he's above people. Well, this article is going to expound on that. It's going to go a little bit deeper into that. And who would know better about a royal than a royal historian? So, like I said, this article is from the Daily Mail, and we're going to jump right in because it's a rather long article. The headline, The Making of Prince Charmless. New biography's devastating psychological portrait of how baby grumpling Andrew was indulged at every turn and shamelessly pursued twin obsessions with women and money. This article was authored by Nigel Cawthorne for the Daily Mail. And just the headline alone is pretty indicting, right? I mean, baby grumpling. What does that even mean? The English, my folk over there in England, you sure have some pretty expressive ways to describe people. A baby grumpling, huh? Sounds like something out of like a Harry Potter novel. Back in the 1980s, the poster boy for the monarchy was a young man who rivaled Princess Diana in the popularity stakes. At his public appearances, girls screamed and even fainted. It was Beatlemania all over again, according to one commentator. So I was too young, I guess, to remember Prince Andrew being super popular or famous. You know, I was born in 1980, so I was probably 4 or 5 years old when he was being fainted over by girls in England, I guess. But I don't ever recall Prince Andrew being famous or popular, especially here in America. And until the whole Jeffrey Epstein situation, I really didn't even know who the hell Prince Andrew was, if I'm being honest. Month after month, there was gushing tributes to Prince Andrew's movie star looks, his straightforwardness, his enviable self-confidence. On top of all of that, he was viewed as a military hero who had put his life on the line for his country. Okay, look, I get it. He was over there in the Falklands fighting, but, I mean, let's not act like he stormed the beaches of Normandy, okay? Let's put everything into perspective here. Yet now, according to recent polls, Andrew is unquestionably the least popular member of the royal family. Well, yeah, that's usually what happens when you're palling around with guys like Jeffrey Epstein. That's usually what happens when you're being accused of having sex with an underage girl that was trafficked to you by Jeffrey Epstein. That's usually what happens. You become pretty unpopular. His now notorious Newsnight interview with Emily Maitlis, in which he defended his friendship with the American pedophile Jeffrey Epstein and failed to express sympathy for the multimillionaire survivors, has led to much mockery and disbelief. Corporate sponsors have deserted him. Charities no longer clamor for his patronage. Even the Queen, Andrew's greatest supporter, bowed to the inevitable. She told him he'd be losing his £249,000 taxpayer-funded salary and could now appear in public only at family events. Well, the Queen had to do that because if the audience from England that pipes in here on the podcast is any indication, the people of England are pissed about a lot of things when it comes to the monarchy, and never mind Prince Andrew and his absolute disregard for the taxpayer dollar, the way the man lived his life, the way the man was conducting his life, and obviously he was committing crimes while on the taxpayer dollar. What's worse than that, right? This is the kind of man, in my opinion, that has zero morality. Zero. How, I wondered, does one even begin to reconcile this unsavory character with the much-adored Prince Charming of the past? Was he too easily influenced or marked by some trauma? Or were the seeds of his misfortune there all along? As I embarked on research for my new biography of the 60-year-old prince, it soon became clear that he had been radically different from his siblings as a child. From the beginning, palace staff found him a handful. His nanny, Mabel Anderson, called him Baby Grumpling because of his temper tantrums and how obstinate he was. And Andrew's alternative nickname was that young imp, as he was always getting up to mischief, such as removing all the valves from Mabel's radio or tying the sentry's shoelaces together. Right from the beginning, Andrew was obviously up to no good, causing mischief. And that's typical for a kid, though, right? We're talking about a little kid here and playing pranks, tying shoelaces together, removing valves from a radio. You could see any kid doing that, right? So I can't hold that too much against the Joe Exotic of the royal family. But what it does show is that he was always a spoiled person, right? And obviously being a prince, that's obvious. Very obvious that he's going to be spoiled. But what the author is showing here is from the very beginning, there were signs that he was going to be a pain in the ass. In contrast to Charles and Anne, who had been born before their mother became queen, he had 7 nurseries and 4 palaces, endless sumptuous treats, and far more of his mother's attention. Prince Philip, too delighted in his boisterous young son, who seemed far more like him than the self-conscious and complicated Charles. Somehow, Andrew was always forgiven, even when he sprinkled itching powder in his mother's bed or climbed on the roof of Buckingham Palace to turn the aerial so that the Queen wouldn't be able to watch the racing at Sandown Park. Now, my question is, if the Queen watching racing, how many units do you think she was wagering on the ponies? I guarantee she was throwing around some dough, right? She was definitely betting on the horses. Any of you English out there who are monarchists or who know about the monarchy, does the Queen, is she notorious for that? I mean, if she's watching the races, I don't know anybody who watches the ponies and doesn't have a few shekels thrown down. So I'm curious if the Queen was firing off fat units. After that last prank, however, even his fond mother had to admit he is not always a little ray of sunshine about the home. Boy, talk about foreshadowing. Talk about Chekhov's gun, huh? She loaded the gun here in scene 1, and then it gets fired off later on in life, and everybody looks back and says, even his mother knew he wasn't a ray of sunshine. Because we've heard stories, right? Not just about when he was a little kid, but in general about how obstinate Prince Andrew was and how much of a pain in the ass he was. Once, he even annoyed his father while the family were watching Bet Lynch get into an argument on Coronation Street. "Oh God, look at all those common people," Andrew shouted. Prince Philip gave his favorite son a rocket. "If it wasn't for people like that," he said, "you would not be sitting here." Why does it remind me of the part where Joffrey is riding through King's Landing and he gets hit with the shit, the cow shit or whatever, the manure, and he orders his soldiers to kill all of the common folk? That's what Andrew strikes me as. The Joe Exotic of the Windsor family definitely strikes me as a Joffrey type. If he was alive in an era where he could have gotten away with cutting people's heads off or putting them in the black cells or the London Tower, you better believe a guy like Andrew would have been all over that, in my opinion. At 8, Andrew was sent to Heatherdown, a prep school in Ascot, Berkshire, where he gained a reputation as a bit of a bully, or a natural boss, according to Philip. The Heatherdown staff, it must be said, were not sorry to see him leave. Next, Andrew was sent to board at Gordonston in Scotland, where he failed to shine academically and at sport. Nor was he popular. Fellow pupils described him as boastful and big-headed. They also dubbed him the Sniggard because he kept telling blue jokes and then laughing so hard, according to one boy, that you couldn't understand the punchline. Again, somebody who just had such a high opinion of himself, even as a child and becoming an adolescent. He was just one of these people. He was born in purple. He was told how great he was forever. He had 50 nannies. He had people waiting on him hand and foot. And he goes to these boarding schools with these other rich kids. Now, mind you, these are other rich kids, right? Other nobles probably, etc., however it works over there. And even they find him to be somebody that they can't stand, somebody that is a bit even boastful for them. And they're in the same sort of, company as him. But that's the kind of person Andrew was as a kid, obviously, and certainly the kind of person he was as a man and is as a man. At 16, Andrew went to Canada with his parents for the 1976 Montreal Olympics. 6 foot of sex appeal was how one Canadian newspaper described him, and he was bombarded with requests for dates. Now look, I ask myself this question, okay? This guy had all these girls throwing themselves at him. He had a Canadian newspaper calling him 6 foot of sex appeal. Why did he need Jeffrey Epstein to hook him up with girls? Why did he need Jeffrey Epstein being involved in his sex life at all? In my opinion, it's because at first it was about the power, right? Well, it's there. These girls are here. I'm going to exert my power. I might as well. And then it became something a lot more when the blackmailing began. Flying back to Canada a year later, he was greeted at the airport by young girls screaming, "We want Andy." In truth, few teenagers could have avoided such adulation going to their heads. Well, if he flies into America, we're gonna show up and we're gonna be screaming, "We want Andy" too, but not in the same way that these young ladies were screaming it. And I bet if you ask those same young ladies who were screaming, "We want Andy" then, if you ask them now how they felt, I am sure they would have a different opinion. It was then that Andrew ditched his suits and his ties, espousing a Marlboro Man look. Jeans, big buckled belts, and open-necked shirts. By contrast, Charles looked stuffy and old-fashioned. Oh, so that was his kit then, huh? No more suits and ties. He was wearing, he had the Marlboro Man look. The big buckled belt, the open-necked shirt. I'm sure he had the ascot as well. I mean, but what happened to the kit that you were supposed to be wearing around London, Andy? Back at Gordonston, there were a series of girlfriends, none of whom lasted long. His luckier female schoolmates cheerfully called themselves Andy's harem, while the girls he ignored bitched, "Whose turn is it on the Royal Rota today?" Well, look, I can understand that as well. He's a royal. He's going to be in high demand. Young ladies are going to want to hang out with him. And my problem isn't with Andrew being a womanizer. That's part and parcel for people that are in his stratosphere. If he's a single man and he wants to go out and he wants to, meet ladies, other ladies of age that are consenting to spend time with him, I don't care what he does. I don't care if he has 5 ladies at once. Hey, more power to you, my man. If I was the Prince of England, I'd be having a grand old time, I'm sure. But guess what? I'd be having a grand old time with people who consented, and I'd be having a grand old time with people who were not pedophiles. His charm, however, seemed reserved for the ladies. Royal bodyguard Ken Wharf recalled being moved from a window seat on a plane from Balmoral because he was obstructing Andrew's view. His manners, Wharf said, are just awful. And we see that as an adult, right? And from the stories that we've heard and the little bit I know about Andrew as a child, it was a mirror image of what he was going to become as an adult, right? Uncoachable kids become unmanageable adults. So when you have somebody like Andrew who is in charge of his whole entire world, even when he's a child and you're the adult, well, he's going to grow up and he's going to be what you see with Andrew. One aide revealed, "I've seen him treat his staff in a shocking, appalling way. He's been incredibly rude to his personal protection officers, throwing things on the ground and demanding they effing pick them up. No social graces at all. Sure, if you're a lady with blonde hair and big boobs, I bet he's utterly charming." And it's the same story from everybody who knows Andrew. Everybody who knows Andrew talks about what a womanizer he is, how he's always chasing women. And that's why when you look at all of the evidence that's presented circumstantially from stories that we've heard from other people, and you add that to the concrete evidence that's been corroborated, that's been brought forward by Virginia Roberts, it's impossible to not come to the conclusion that the Joe Exotic of the Windsor family knows a lot more than he's letting on, and he was involved in a lot more than he's willing to admit to. Andrew didn't exactly excel at his official duties either. On a visit to Lockerbie, where 11 people had died on the ground when Pan Am Flight 103 crashed in December 1988. He told the grieving locals that the disaster had been much worse for the Americans. There were 190 American casualties compared with 43 British ones, and that it had only been a matter of time before a plane fell out of the sky. Well, he would know. I mean, he was thick as thieves with Prince Bandar Bush. We know who he is. We all know about Bandar bin Sultan. We all know the stories about Andrew with the arms dealers. And he would definitely know about planes falling out of the sky, hanging out with the people he was hanging out with. And to say that it was worse for the Americans because we had 190 American casualties to only 43 British casualties is absolutely positively disgusting. Every single one of those lives matters, 1 or 50 or 300. It's all a tragedy. It's all a travesty. You know, just because there's 190 Americans doesn't give Andrew the right to run around and tell the English folk on the ground and tell the English people, oh, yeah, not that big of a deal. Because, look, you know, the Americans lost 190 people. It just shows you how out of touch the man is. All his mother said in private about the matter was, I wish I had gone. On leaving school, Andrew decided to become a pilot in the Navy. On his first day at the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth, which Charles had attended, he pulled up in his new Ford Escort RS2000, ignoring the fact that cars were banned for recruits. It's like the new free agent signing that comes to your team, like Antonio Brown, and he shows up in a damn hot air balloon, right? There's no need for it. Just show up, get ready to go. You don't need to make a splash. We all know that, you know, you're the man. But this idiot has to show up in a car. Nobody else has their car. Nobody else is allowed to drive their car if you're a recruit. But the rules don't matter to Prince Andrew. He's going to do what he wants to do. The other cadets resented his privileges, not to mention the requirement to salute his car when he drove around the base. As one recalled, he played the big I am the prince routine all the time and seemed rather arrogant. And of course he did. And that, again, followed him into adulthood. He did the same exact thing. When you hear stories about Andrew, the kind of person he was, the way he treated people, the way he conducted himself, you know that he was one of these people who bought into his own nonsense, right? Bought into his own hype, bought into the things that were told to him about how great he is because of the blood that was running through his veins. Meanwhile, the dude's the biggest doofus going, and in fact, totally fits the role as the Joe Exotic of the Windsor family. I mean, it's the perfect name for this guy, the perfect analogy, the perfect comparison. Even the higher ranks were left somewhat underwhelmed. Andrew is very likable, but he's very conscious of being a royal, said one senior officer. He is a bit of a mummy's boy. You could never say that about Charles, and Charles certainly wouldn't talk about girl conquests. Again, this is Andrew's MO. This is how he's been rolling since he's been young. That's why it's so believable when we hear what Virginia Roberts had to say when you add it to all the other evidence that we have seen. Because it is a blueprint that he has had from his youth, basically. While at Dartmouth, Andrew's nickname among his classmates was Golden Eagle because of his habit of dropping clangers when questioned by his instructors. Still, he made a big effort towards the end of the course and ended up receiving the Best Pilot Award from his proud father. Yeah, I'm sure there was no nepotism there. I am sure that there was no nepotism involved in him receiving that Best Pilot Award. I bet it was all done on merit. Because we know that the Joe Exotic of the Windsor family was, the Red Baron reincarnated, right? His first tour of duty was on the aircraft carrier HMS Hermes. When introduced to the captain, he said casually, "Hi, I'm Prince Andrew, but you can call me Andrew." The captain replied, "And you can call me sir." I like that response. And if I had a good British accent, an English accent, I would have just read that. His response in an English accent, but I can't. But can you imagine this captain, right? He's on a ship, he's on the aircraft carrier, he's in charge of this basically floating city, this self-contained floating city, and this princeling comes onto your boat. He's like, "Hey, I'm Prince Andrew, but you can call me Andrew." And the captain just replies to him, "And you can call me sir." So I bet you that shut him up real quick, Prince Andrew. I wonder if he realized he was in a different world at that point. Not long after his 22nd birthday, the new sub-lieutenant found himself at war. On April 2nd, 1982, Argentina had invaded the Falklands, and Andrew's ship, the HMS Invincible, was one of the first to set sail for the South Atlantic. The war ended in a matter of 10 weeks. Like his fellow servicemen, Andrew had executed his military duties with dedication and honor, deploying his Sea King helicopter to attract missiles away from Invincible and soaring above them before they exploded. He also flown to the aid of a downed British helicopter. I wonder if that's where he learned not to sweat, when he was flying to the aid of a downed British helicopter, or when he was doing his death-defying air assault to dodge missiles so they didn't hit the aircraft carrier. Somehow I don't believe any of that occurred, not to that glorious extent anyway. On his return, the palace helped push Andrew center stage as a hero. He gave interviews about his experiences as a decoy and spoke of his fear while under attack. He failed to mention the other personnel who had helped rescue the sole survivor of the downed helicopter. Well, nobody really noticed. And he failed to talk about his non-sweating condition that he had. Nobody ever heard of that until he showed up and started talking about that was his excuse for not being in the picture, etc., etc. I mean, come on. Suddenly, the bar against which the warrior prince would be judged for the rest of his life had been set very high. In the Falklands aftermath, he was treated like a rock star. When he drove up in a Rolls-Royce to switch on the Regent streetlights, for instance, hundreds of women wailed with emotion and chanted, "We want Andy." The police, with linked arms, could barely contain the tightly packed crowds. Again, come to America and it'll be the same way, but the police will have to contain people from making a citizen's arrest, because guess what? We want Andy too. There was now tremendous interest in the love life of the man dubbed as Royal Heartthrob. Yet even dedicated royal watchers were finding it hard to keep up with his ever-changing cast of girlfriends, many of them models. And again, I don't have a problem with that. If this dude's the Prince of England. What do you think? He's not going to have girls wanting to date him, wanting to be in his atmosphere? Of course that's going to happen. Of course there's going to be women who are flocking to him. Why didn't you just stick with that, Joe Exotic of the royal family? Why didn't you just stick with consenting women who wanted to spend time with you? You had to go after a trafficked girl that Jeffrey Epstein provided, huh? Before going to the Falklands, Andrew had dated 19-year-old Miss UK Carolyn Seward, who was also spotted leaving Buckingham Palace early one morning. Then there was Koo Stark, an American starlet he had met one night at Tramp nightclub in London. Now remember, that's the same nightclub that he was with Virginia Roberts at, according to Virginia. Now that's where they were hanging out, that's where he was getting her drinks, and that's where he got her primed to take her back to Ghislaine Maxwell's pad in Belgravia. He had written to her while away with the task force, and Koo, who was best known then for appearing in an erotic film, had sent him photos of herself. One in a skin-tight outfit, another in a black t-shirt emblazoned with the words, "Weird Fantasy." But he was writing to Carolyn Seward at the same time. Again, I do not care about any of that. Whatever he was doing in his personal love life is his business. After news of the Koo romance broke, even her Spanish-born cleaning lady made the headlines. I saw the prince leave 2 or 3 times at about 9 in the morning, she said. He always looked rather tired. Well, yeah, I'm sure they weren't there playing Jenga, okay? I'm sure they weren't talking about the Queen's tea recipes. I'm sure they were there doing what princes do at that time of night with women who want them at their house, all right? Again, this kind of salacious nonsense, I really don't care about it. It's part of the story, obviously, that this historian's telling. But as far as we're concerned with the Jeffrey Epstein case, it doesn't really prove anything, this kind of stuff, one way or the other. Besides the fact that it definitely, proves he's a womanizer, and we all know that, but that's certainly not a crime, right? That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about Andrew and his relationship with Epstein. We're not talking about a guy who just liked to be around women or liked to have multiple women as partners or whatever it may be, because then that's nobody's business. But that is not what Prince Andrew is accused of. That is not what Andrew was involved in. And what Prince Andrew is accused of, what the Joe Exotic of the Windsor family is accused of, what he's accused of doing to Virginia Roberts while being a member of Jeffrey Epstein's criminal enterprise, be it by his own will or being blackmailed, it does not matter. It is something that is unconscionable, that a man like Prince Andrew can be involved in something like that, and still he has not answered any hard questions. Coup, however, deemed unsuitable, and the couple broke up in 1983. Then, Andrew's next girlfriend ruled herself out when nude pictures of her surfaced, and another, the topless model Vicky Hodge, went a step further by selling the story of their romance to the news of the world for £40,000. She claimed to have discovered why Andrew's previous affairs had been so brief. Apparently, he finished far too quickly, and though Vicky said he took her advice to distract himself by counting, he put her off by counting aloud. Again, this is more, alright, salacious tabloid stuff, but hey, again, it is the overall picture of Andrew, and it does paint a picture of a man who is an utter buffoon, right? This is a guy who had the whole world at his feet. Everything you could have ever wanted. And he chose to hang around with people like this. He chose to hang around with topless models, etc., knowing that in his role as a royal, he's going to be scrutinized to a level that normal people wouldn't be. So if you're a normal person and you want to have a relationship with a porno star or a topless model or whatever, hey, go for it. Who cares? If you're in love with that person, have at it. But for somebody like Andrew, who's in the public light, it's not a good idea to be involved with people like this. The palace was far more sanguine about Sarah Ferguson, aka Fergie, the daughter of Prince Charles' polo manager. Princess Diana, who got on well with her, had helped engineer the match. In February 1986, while on shore leave, Andrew dropped to his knees and said, "Miss Ferguson, will you marry me?" After their wedding at Westminster Abbey, attended by 1,800 guests, the couple moved into Sunninghill Park, a modern 50-room mansion at Berkshire with a staff of 11 and a giant bathtub that the builders called HMS Fergie. To begin with, the marriage was so passionate that the couple's public displays of affection sometimes embarrassed their friends. But Andrew's naval duties soon took him away. In 1990, Fergie reckoned they had spent only 42 nights a year together in their 4 years of marriage. To make matters worse, he devoted most of his energy, when at home, to playing golf. Well, that's what he told her, at least. How many of men have said they were going to play golf and then went off to enjoy side piece weekend. And what do you think, Andrew was above that? The Joe Exotic of the Windsor family was certainly not an honorable man, and I am sure he was dancing outside of the marriage when it came to his marriage with Fergie. Bored, Fergie began gallivanting around London clubs with the newly liberated Diana and jetting off on numerous holidays. Soon nicknamed Freeloading Fergie, she demanded payment for interviews, asked designers to give her free clothes, and complained that her allowance didn't cover first-class air travel. Oh, can you imagine the humanity of it all? No first-class air travel, but you're still getting to travel on the dime of the English taxpayer, aren't you? That's not enough, though, right? That's not enough. You have to have the whole entire cake. Half of it isn't enough. 3/4 isn't enough. The whole entire cake you have to have, you damn glutton. The prince asked for a divorce in 1992 after pictures emerged of Fergie on holiday with a Texan playboy. Not long afterwards, a far more damaging set of pictures, taken in the south of France, showed her topless and having her so sucked by the... Hold on, wait a minute. Slow down. I gotta reread this. Not long afterwards, a far more damaging set of pictures, taken in the south of France, showed her topless and having her toes sucked by the financial advisor who was negotiating the divorce. What? So Fergie was hanging out in France, getting her toe sucked on by her financial advisor who was negotiating the divorce at the time. I mean, I got to catch up on my royal intrigue, I guess, because I wasn't aware of any of that. Yet even after the marriage ended, Sarah continued to live with Andrew. Indeed, still does. Their home since 2004 has been the Royal Lodge in Windsor, a 30-room Georgian property set in 98 acres with 8 cottages for staff. I mean, 2 people need 8 cottages for staff. How much staff do you need for 2 people? You can't make yourself a hamburger? You don't know how to make yourself some bacon and eggs? You need 8 cottages on your 98-acre piece of property to serve 2 people, huh? Talk about first world problems. For this, the prince paid the Crown Estates just £1 million for a £1 million for a 75-year lease, the equivalent of £250 a week. He also spent £7.5 million doing it up, adding a swimming pool and driving range. How did he pay for it? Possibly he relied on the Bank of Mum, as his naval pension plus the sum the Queen paid him annually wouldn't have even covered the interest. Despite cohabitating with his ex-wife, the prince, now widely known as Randy Andy, or, like we prefer to call him here on the podcast, the Joe Exotic of the Windsor family, indulged in a slew of affairs. One royal watcher reckoned that by 2010, he had about 15 girlfriends since his divorce. Among them were French professional golfer Audrey Rambault, British PR woman Caroline Stanbury, model turned TV presenter Katrina Skepper, PR executive Aurelia Cecile, South African former burger bar waitress Heather Mann, former Miss USA Julie Hayek, and ex-Playboy model Denise Martell. The only real threat to Fergie's dominance was businesswoman Amanda Staveley, whom Prince Philip thought would be an ideal Duchess of York. As far as I'm concerned, every single one of those ladies who didn't hook up with him dodged the bullet, right? Imagine ending up married to this guy and finding out the monster that he is for what he done and for the company he kept. Imagine being this guy's this guy's wife, and he comes to you and he's like, oh yeah, I'm going to fly to New York. I'm going to go hang out with Jeffrey. I'm going to break off my relationship with him. Imagine what your reaction would be if you were his wife. I know what my girlfriend her reaction would be if I told her something like that. I'd come home, all my shit would be out on the front lawn. I'd have nothing in the house left. She'd probably burn all my clothes. You're going to hang out with a what? You're going to hang out with a pedophile? Yeah, okay, have a good time. Have a nice trip. Better call an Uber on the way home. Come back, your shit's all over the lawn that's been, ritualistically set on fire. That's exactly what I'd be in store for me if I was hanging out with somebody like this. But Andrew, just does whatever he wants and nobody cares. Fergie, she's right along with him. Just 2 sick people, in my opinion. 2 peas in a pod. But when Andrew proposed in 2004, Amanda turned him down. If I married him, all my independence would have disappeared, she said. As for Sunninghill Park, it languished on the market until 2011, when it sold for £15 million, £3 million over the asking price, to a Kazakh oligarch. Why pay over the odds for a house that was then almost derelict? Clearly there was something fishy about the deal, which attracted the interest of prosecutors in Italy and Switzerland. But the palace insisted it was all above board, and presumably mere coincidence that Andrew, in his capacity as trade ambassador, had met the buyer's son-in-law. Yeah, everything's a coincidence with these people, right? Everything's a coincidence in this case. Everything's a coincidence with Prince Andrew. Everything's a coincidence with Jeffrey Epstein. That's what they would have you believe, folks. That is the narrative and the bullshit they would have you choke down. The bad news for them is none of us are buying it. Nobody believes them. Nobody believes their bullshit. And nobody is being force-fed their garbage narrative ever again. Today, it's hard to work out why anyone ever thought the prince would be particularly good at promoting trade deals. After leaving the Navy, Andrew had drifted, which earned him a tongue lashing from Prince Philip for being selfish and lazy. The next thing we knew, in 2001, Andrew was officially representing British business interests abroad. By now, his abiding interest in the opposite sex had at times become rather apparent. In October 2000, he had been seen with Epstein and the multimillionaire pedophile's alleged pimp-cum-girlfriend, co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell, at a Pimps and Hookers party in a New York nightclub. Then, at a Chinese New Year reception, Andrew was photographed beside a topless waitress. Now, why would the Prince of England be at a Pimps and Hoes party? I worked at the Joint at the Hard Rock here in Las Vegas in the capacity as stage manager and as a stagehand for more than a decade. And I went to many Pimp and Hoes parties and worked many of them. Never once was there a royal there running around, hanging out, acting the fool. What was this guy thinking, hanging out at a Pimp and Hoes party? He was also snapped on board a luxury yacht off the Thai island of Phuket, surrounded by topless beauties. Epstein and Maxwell were fellow guests. Asked about these pictures, Andrew claimed, "I was just reading my book. I really wasn't aware of what everyone else was doing." In Thailand, he toured the red light district of Patong and danced in a go-go bar, motto, "Good food, cold drinks, hot girls," with half-naked young women. Aides at the palace were said to have been furious. And this is another thing that Andrew always says, "Oh, I didn't know. I had no idea that was going on. I was just reading my book. It had nothing to do with me." Same thing about Epstein. "I didn't know what was going on. I was just getting my feet massaged from some foreign lady. I had no clue. I thought it was all on the up and up. I thought she was from Brighton Beach." Really? Is this what this guy thinks? No one's believing any of this shit. And the more we go back and the more we read articles and the more that comes out and the more we can put against what he has said and see that it's a lie, the more apparent it is that this man is, at this point, barely treading water. Andrew's much vaunted charm appeared to have deserted him. A woman who met him at a party in Saint-Tropez complained he doesn't have much conversation other than about himself. Another remarked, "He's everything people tell you, boorish, interrupts you, and laughs at his own jokes." Nor was he doing much better as the special representative for British trade and investment. Within months, complaints were pouring in. Too often, the Foreign Office's protocol department said he refused to stick to the agreed itinerary and left a trail of glass in his wake. Of course, why would he stick to the itinerary? He couldn't get involved in his backroom deals if he was sticking to the itinerary. He had to get into the rooms with people like the Kazakh oligarch. He had to make sure he was rubbing shoulders with people like that. He had to make sure he was sneaking off to go chill with Jeffrey Epstein. Andrew's relations around the world are dicey, commented one official at the weekly heads of department meeting. He's showing bad judgment about people. He's rude, lashes out to lay down the law, and it's so difficult to sell him. That's all of the attributes of a narcissist. This man has a very high opinion of himself, and nobody has ever been around to call him out and tell him different. Well, I hope at some point he hears this podcast, and I hope he hears that I call him the Joe Exotic of the Windsor family, because you, buddy, that's exactly what you are. In 2010, our royal envoy was reported to have spent £154,000 on hotels, food, and hospitality, and £465,000 on travel. Part of this expense was because he traveled with a team of private secretaries and a valet with a 6-foot ironing board so Andrew could have perfect creases in his trousers. I guess my question is that the kit you wore when you were going to be involved in the trafficking of Virginia Roberts, sir? Were your trousers creased that night? Punk ass. Soon he had acquired yet another nickname, this time in diplomatic circles, HBH, or His Buffoon Highness. That is a great one for him too, right? We've heard that one before, and that's fitting, because if anything, this dude is absolutely a buffoon. Ambassador Sir Ivor Richard, who hosted Andrew's visit to Italy, described him as brusque to the point of rudeness. At one party, the prince had dismissed the head of a well-known fashion house with the words, "Never heard of you." That's how that's just in a nutshell how these people are, how all of them feel. Oh, I never heard of you. What can you do for me? And if the answer is nothing, then you're put to the side like trash. The problem with Andrew, a senior Buckingham Palace official said in 2001, is that his mouth engages before his brain does. Well, we know that. The dude's brain dead. He's not the brightest bulb in the box. We saw how Emily Maitlis completely dismantled him. She slapped the most vicious piece of verbal jujitsu on somebody in an interview I've seen in quite some time. Dude should have tapped out at the very beginning. Instead, he stood in there and took a beating the whole way. His jaunts around the world allowed him to collect a wide circle of dubious acquaintances, including Saif al-Islam, son of the Libyan dictator Colonel Gaddafi, now wanted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. Well, be that as it may, I could think of a few other people that should be wanted for crimes against humanity when it comes to Libya, and they are not Libyan. They're from America and England. What happened in Libya is an absolute... It's disgusting what happened in Libya. And the after effects, because of the ill-timed and the piss-poor planned operations to get rid of Gaddafi, what has occurred in the aftermath and in the wake of all of that, it is criminal. And that's being nice about it. Certainly Andrew seemed to think he was above the rules. In 2002, he told a police officer who pulled him over for speeding that he was in a hurry to get to a golf tournament, as it turned out, and drove off before he could be given a ticket. 3 years later, there was a standoff at Melbourne Airport in Australia when he refused to subject himself to routine security screening. "Who does he think he is?" one of the airport security team said. "What a pompous prick." I love it. Definitely, again, the common people, when they have run-ins with people like Andrew, and Andrew conducts himself this way, the common people know exactly what he is, even when he has his happy face on. They know deep down in their hearts that Andrew don't give a goddamn about them, that none of these royals care about any of us. There was another big problem. Used to traveling in private or RAF jets, Andrew refused to fly on commercial airlines. In 2003 alone, it was reported that he spent £325,000 on flights, including £2,939 for a helicopter to make a 120-mile round trip to Oxford, and RAF jets to fly him to St. Andrews for 2 golfing jaunts. Most of his trips that emerged were to places that had golf courses. In 2004, he was criticized for taking an RAF jet to Northern Ireland, where he played a round of golf before turning up late to a royal garden party. The following year, there were the trips costing £32,000 to golfing events at St. Andrews. He remained unapologetic even after it was revealed that his flights in 2007 had cost £565,000, most paid for by the taxpayer. In terms of the return on investment to the UK, he said, "I would suggest that £500,000 is cheap at that price." Yeah, so it's real cheap for you to live your life, huh? £500,000 for you to fly around and be hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein and Nygaard and whoever else? Boy, oh boy, this man needs to answer some questions, and he needs to answer them now. Throughout this period of rubbing shoulders with the super rich and famous, and in some cases corrupt, the prince had been regularly seeing Epstein, who bankrolled the ever cash-strapped Fergie to the tune of at least £15,000. It was this catastrophic lack of judgment that finally paid to Andrew's post as trade envoy in 2011, when his link to the convicted pedophile became public. His Playboy career could be just about tolerated, but his 3 alleged trysts with one of Epstein's 17-year-old survivors were in another category altogether. Yeah, that's like I was saying earlier. Look, if you want, you can survive as a politician or a royal or a famous person. You can survive an affair. You can survive being a womanizer. You can't survive abusing children. You can't survive being involved in trafficking. Andrew denies they took place, and despite publication of a photo of him holding her around the waist, claims he can't recall meeting her. Today, his life of extraordinary privilege continues to unravel. A 16.6 million pound Swiss chalet he owns with Fergie risks being seized by debt collectors because the couple failed to pay a final 6.6 million pound installment. Although Epstein's dead, the FBI says it's continuing to focus on the prince and his connection to the sex trafficking of minors. Yeah, a lot of talk, no walk though, right? We hear you, Berman. We hear what you're saying, but can we see some action? Can we see some tangible movement? Can we see a little bit of, a little bit of inner fortitude from you guys, huh? Bite down on your mouthpiece. After a lifetime of doing whatever he wants, more or less with impunity, Prince Andrew is out in the cold. Worse, he faces the nightmare scenario of giving evidence under oath about his friendship with a pedophile. And look, that is the worst case scenario for Andrew at this point. He can't go under oath. He knows it, his legal team knows it, and we all know it. And that is why the lawyers for the survivors and for Virginia in particular are pushing so hard for this man to be questioned under oath. Because once he's under oath, it's a whole new ballgame, right? The court of public opinion has already spoken. We've seen the evidence that's been provided. Andrew would have to provide serious evidence that disputes what Virginia has brought forward. And to this point, the only evidence that he has brought forward, I shouldn't even say evidence because it's not even evidence. The only alibi that we have heard from him is that he had his daughters that night at the pizza joint, so he couldn't be involved in any sort of hanging out with Virginia. That picture was fake. He doesn't sweat. And the fat fingers excuse. And what I have to say to him about that is, nobody believes you. Okay? Nobody. Not the polar bears in the great Arctic North, and not the penguins all the way down south that are hanging out in Antarctica. Prince Andrew, the Joe Exotic of the Windsor family, you, my friend, are on the clock. If you'd like to contact me, you could do that at Bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All right, folks, we'll be back tomorrow and we'll do it all over again. I hope you all have an amazing Friday night.